Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to have you all here today as we have one of the core trainings for the new Medi-Cal Mobile Crisis Services benefit. This is the harm reduction training on substance use. Today we have empowering voices and choices for safer lives. This is a DHCS project, and I am Danielle Ragib. I am from the MTAC Medi-Cal Mobile Crisis Training and Technical Assistance Center. Many of you have been in spaces with me before, so excited to be here with you all again. And so I'm just going to introduce our presenters today. Today we have Dr. Jennifer Hodson. She's a licensed and marriage family therapist. The scope of her experience is higher education training environments, including medical education, residence training, and medical family therapy through a master's and doctoral programs. She co-developed the first medical family therapy doctoral program in the nation and served as a major professor to 21 doctoral students during her tenure at East Carolina University. Her skill set in designing and implementing programs includes leading needs assessment and providing technical assistance to ensure quality and fidelity are maintained. Her expertise includes her ability to train and develop quality metrics at the clinical, operational, financial, and educational level. She conducts research with lived experiences to really drive programming and service delivery. We're really excited to have Dr. Hodson today. We also have Ariana Mellinger, who is a licensed chemical dependency counselor and a recovery supports peer specialist. Ariana was the first youth peer specialist at the Harris Center in Houston, Texas. She joined the Harris Center in 2020 as a youth peer support specialist, where she played an integral part in the development, networking, and marketing of the Texas System of Care Grant Project Change. The youth she engaged with struggled to get their mental health needs met in more traditional treatment settings, leading involvement in multiple systems and often out-of-home placement. By sharing her lived experience in the areas of mental health, substance dependence, and the criminal justice system, she strives to make an impact in their lives for inspiring hope and teaching skills to help them to navigate the road to wellness. And today we will hear a lot from Ariana and her experience. And so we are excited, and I welcome you, Ariana and Dr. Hodson, and I also hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. So our learning objectives today are going to be at the conclusion. We're going to be able to explain 4 ways to engage in harm reduction work using a trauma-informed care and culturally responsive lens. We're going to be able to identify at least 3 benefits to a low barrier model of care. We're going to be able to deliver 5 harm reduction strategies that will help reduce risk and increase safety for people using substances. And we are going to be able to recall 2 techniques for administering naloxone and fentanyl overdose for a fentanyl overdose. I just want to let you guys know that this is an activation warning. There are some pretty touchy topics in part of this webinar, and that we encourage you guys to keep yourself safe and take care of yourself during this webinar. I'm going to pass it off to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Ariana. And thank you, Danielle, for such a great job with the introductions. It's always difficult to hear people talking about you, so do appreciate the excellent work. So today we're going to be moving through, as Ariana said, some really sensitive topics, but I want everybody to just keep in mind that at the end of this, we want you to have developed some skills, but we don't expect that everybody's going to be experts in harm reduction. This is a very, person-centered approach to harm reduction. So knowing that each of you has experiences that are incredibly important and valid that you're going to be building on, as well as knowledge about your communities and what they need specific to what's happening with use and harm reduction. So today we're just going to take you through some of the content, but knowing at the end, we want you to definitely walk away with some new skills or ideas that you can continue to build on. It's really important that we start off thinking about harm reduction in understanding the whole person. And part of that is to understand the influence that trauma has. So whether people have been through 1 or 10 traumas in a lifetime or more, we develop coping strategies on how to manage those things. Sometimes our coping strategies are helpful, sometimes they're harmful. And that's where substance use disorders oftentimes step in to fill that space. So we want to really think about harm reduction as reducing negative consequences that are oftentimes associated with substance use. Things like safer use, managed use, abstinence are all going to be part of that movement in harm reduction. Individuals oftentimes are reluctant to stop using harmful coping strategies because they do serve a purpose. And I remember years ago when we were talking and training people about what are the positive effects of use, people were like, wait a minute, we can't talk about, the positive effects of use. And we said, well, why can't we? Because that's what's really keeping the person engaged. And until we understand what they're getting from that use, we're not going to be able to get their trust, earn their trust, and move them towards safer use or reduced use and complete abstinence. So understanding why people are using is an extremely important part of harm reduction. It also helps us to build a relationship, which is fundamental to helping our people that we're working with understand that we're on a walking journey with them. We're not here to direct their care, but to help them discover what their next step is. And again, effective intervention has to come from a position of understanding and respect. So this is deeply, deeply connected to being culturally responsive. So operating within those things that are fundamentally part of their identity and their connections with others around them. And that we're working to be person-centered. And I'm going to step you through some slides that are coming up that really break those down a little bit more. But ultimately, any action plan that we come up with has to be keeping in mind what people have been through, what purpose their coping is serving, what connection it all has to their culture, and what connection change has to their culture. And how do we create something that's really person-centered and not like a cookie cutter, action plan that really isn't going to work for anything other than the person who probably designed it. Okay. So different ways that trauma appears and reappears in our lives. Some examples of that are substance use, risky sexual behavior, self-harm, suicidality, avoidance and withdrawal behaviors. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So we walk through the grocery store, we see a product, and it automatically connects us back to a traumatic memory. So things can be triggers that are immediate to us or unknown to us. But these are stress responses that are connected to traumatic experiences. And also sometimes trauma appears and reappears by remaining in relationships that may not be helpful to us in the ways that we need to move toward change. So, these are just some examples of ways that trauma appears or reappears. What are some other things that in the chat box, if you want to put in, what are some other ways that trauma might appear in a person's life? And feel free to put your thoughts in the chat box. Violence, lashing out, isolation. Absolutely. So when we get triggered, the way that trigger takes us, the path that it takes it down can be very, very individualized. Sometimes trauma triggers perfectionism. Sometimes it triggers somebody to work, because that becomes a safe part of their identity. So lack of boundaries, personality changes. Absolutely. Great job, everybody. All right. So here is another chat box participation. And I really, Ariana and I put these in the front because we really want your voices to be a powerful part of this experience. So the first prompt that we would like for you to respond to is, what are some coping strategies that are harmful but may bring relief to the person using them? Workaholism, cutting, self-injury, substance, drinking, vaping, drugs, alcohol and drugs. Yes, drugs, oversleeping, hypersleeping, sleeping excessively or lack of sleep, reckless risk behaviors. Oh, food. Thank you for mentioning the food, right? Over or under eating. Absolutely. So you can see that coping strategies are just as diverse as the people that we're going to serve. So being prepared as people going in to offer support is really kind of figuring out what's the kaleidoscope, of coping that's happening. And sometimes we can build on some positive coping strategies that might be concealed with some harmful ones. Exercising too much. Absolutely. All right, the next prompt. Why might someone not want to stop using their coping strategies even though they are harmful? Right, they think they're helping because they work. Right. It takes care of that feeling, that impulse, that fear. It's gratifying. Right. It's more instant. Oftentimes it's a quicker reduction in whatever it is that's making us uncomfortable than if we step through the journey of dealing with it in a different way that's unfamiliar. It's easier than change. Right. Don't know what else to do. Absolutely. We get so entrenched in that coping strategy that we don't know what else to do and what steps to take. All right. The last one is when you hear person-centered, what does that mean to you? And then what does it have to do with being trauma-informed and culturally responsive? When somebody tells you we want you to do person-centered care, what does that mean to you? The client is the expert. Excellent. Meeting them where they're at, individualized, seeing the person as an equal dignity. Oh, here we go. How it affects different being empathic. Absolutely. Tailored to the person. These are all language terms that you can then use going out into the field, as you don't have to say, today I'm going to be doing person-centered care with you, but today I'm going to walk with you to help figure out the best next step for you. No judgment, right? So hush and listen. Some of the best interventions are when we just allow silence. Absolutely. Absolutely. Taking into account the whole person. Fabulous. Great job. So when developing this training, we have been really intentional about pairing trauma-informed care and harm reduction. So you're going to see that sort of woven throughout the entire presentation today, as well as being culturally responsive. And, whether it's, being triggered for use or knowing that once I reduce my use, these powerful feelings are going to be coming up that are connected to my trauma. So whether it's why I'm using or what may surface after I start to decrease my use. Being aware that trauma is going to be part of that. And it might reawaken, lots and lots of feelings that the person that we're caring for has been putting deep down. But Laura Prescott said, I had been coerced into treatment by people who said they're trying to help. These things, just the kind of help that was being directed towards her, all re-stimulated feelings of futility, reawakening the sense of hopelessness and loss of control that I experienced when being abused. Without exception, these episodes reinforced my sense of distrust in people and belief that help meant humiliation, loss of control, and loss of dignity. So that's why it is absolutely so critical that we walk with the people we're helping through harm reduction strategies, and we're very, very cognizant of the trauma-informed care that needs to go with that. So this is just giving you some examples of things that you can ask, and I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but they're just some possible questions that could help you connect to people around things like, how do we help empower their voice? Well, we can ask them, what would be the best first step in changing your use versus, we recommend this step. What step would you like to take? And it might be even, bigger than what you had originally thought. Maybe it's too big, but it's their voice coming in saying, this is where I feel like I can go and grow. So really empowering their voice, making sure that we're being collaborative and mutually engaging. And I saw some of you mentioned that. So we're working together, We are prioritizing safety, which a huge part of harm reduction is trying to get them to reduce use in the safest possible way. Really, for our work is being trusting and transparent, letting them know exactly what's going to happen before we take each step. A lot of times people are afraid that if we tell them what we might be doing, we'll lose them. But actually what we know is by not being transparent, and there's very rare occasions where we wouldn't, we will lose them even more. So being transparent, and I have got clinical examples, and I'm sure many of you do, of times where either we were asked by a supervisor or we made the mistake of not being transparent, and it really hurt the trust. And then respecting cultural identity, asking people what language would they prefer services to be in. Even though they might speak fluently in English, it might be that they feel much more comfortable going through the process in their dominant language. So figuring out what would make them most comfortable and utilizing that. Maybe there are some people in their lives that would be important to them that they bring forward because they understand their background, they understand their intentions and their supports. And then asking them, what name would you like me to call you? You know, that's really important, that people feel like a name is being seen, right? That you see me and you respect me. That is a really important one as well. And then a people first language. So a person with substance abuse, a person who uses, heroin versus a heroin user, right? So that individual knows that this use is a part of my experience. It's not who I am. Because a lot of that comes with stigma that then people shut down if they don't think you see them. So names are really important. Another framework that I like to use and teach is called the 4 C's of culture. And so if you can think about when you're walking with people in your work is helping them to identify what do they call, whatever's happening. What cause do they think is associated with it? How do they cope? And what concerns do they have? So that gets you to really connect with them around their experience versus your own experience, what you read in a book, or what somebody else may have told you before you got there. So the first one is call. So you want to find out what they call the problem. Some possible ways to do that is to say, what do you think happened? I hear you say what everybody else thinks happened, but what do you think is the main issue? And then if you were to name this issue that's giving you the greatest trouble, what would you call it? I once worked with somebody who was really struggling with bulimia nervosa, but she didn't like that, being called that. So, and she had also been sexually assaulted as a child. So she decided she was going to call bulimia nervosa's issues and the assault it. So the entire time I worked with her, I said issues and it. And that opened her up in ways that I never would have been able to accomplish with her had I continued to use technical language. The next one is cause. What does the person think caused, the issue or the problem, whatever they're calling it, So this is really important because it helps us to understand what do they see are the events that led up to what happened. So we're coming out because they're in crisis. So what are their perceptions of what initiated that crisis? It could have been a relational interaction and not necessarily the substance use. So it's really important that we understand what is their perspective of where the urgent needs are in their world, because that does fuel their decision to use those coping strategies that are harmful. All right. The next one is cope. How do they cope with it? What have they done to try to make things better and worse regarding their use? And then who helps them to cope when they're having a difficult time? That can really open up some resources that could be useful when we're helping to develop the action plan. Maybe it's, a person of faith. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's nobody that they live with, but somebody outside the home. And so it's really important that we know who those people are and we can put them on the plan. When days are better, when days are not going as well, what's different? So we try to build on those exceptions, those sparkling moments where things might actually be a little bit better that day. Maybe they were able to have greater access to food, or they had a safe place to sleep the night before. So there could be some things that we need to know and understand about that's a part of coping that we necessarily wouldn't think of unless we asked. And then the last one is concern. So what are their concerns about treatment, getting treatment? Because sometimes that's a huge barrier, is there's either some myths or some real practical issues, access, cost, and we'll get into those later. They may not think it's as serious, as everybody else's, so their stage of change may be very different. They might fear complications from some of the treatments because they've heard things about them. So sometimes I'll even scale it with them. I'll say in a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, the most concerned you've ever been about this, where are you at this moment? Is there something that concerns you more? Or, of the people that you've talked about, your friends and family that you've mentioned, who's the most concerned? How concerned do you think they are? That helps me to get a sense of where they're at in their distress, where they're at in their concern, so we can try to find the best course of action together. Okay, so this is a skill building exercise that we're going to do together. And it's going to start off by having you watch like a 5-minute video. It's just an interaction between two people, one who's there to provide support and help, and another who's there who's having some distress. I just want you to pick one thing in this list, and it doesn't matter what you pick, whether, watching the video for ways that the interviewer engages in a non-judgmental way, ways that the interviewer shows empathy, ways that they are person-centered, ways that they may help figure out what the person wants to call what's going on, what they think caused it, how they cope, or what concerns they have. So if you can just watch the video, pick one of those things, and then when we come back in, we'll roll through the chat box and see what types of things you were able to observe.
Josh, what brought you in today? It sounded kind of urgent.
My sister said she's going to kick me out, or that she might kick me out. And I don't know what I'm going to do.
Wow, tell me more. What's going on?
Well, it's complicated. Basically, she said if I don't take my meds every day, then I can't stay there anymore.
Oh, have you been taking your meds?
I'm taking my meds now, but I stopped. I did stop for a while. I stopped for about a month. I didn't call you. But I'm back on them.
Well, that's good. So can you tell me more about what brought you to decide not to take them for a while?
Well, it's been, we talked about this before. Like, I know it's the smart thing to be on my meds because of the bipolar disease, but they change me, and like I'm safer, but I'm not like artist Josh is harder to get into. Like, I just don't have the same, I can't do my art in the same way, and that's what usually gets me thinking, like, maybe this time I'd be okay.
Yeah.
If I just, I take them every other day, or I cut them in half, or I stop taking them, and then it just goes on, and I gotta, then.
Well, let's talk about that part about then it goes on, because I do really hear what you're saying about wanting to be more in touch with your artist self, and I think that is a really important part of who you are.
It is.
But tell me, what does that future look like where you're not taking meds? Maybe you're more creative, but are there other aspects as well?
Well, that's, I don't always know what to do, because I can not take my meds, do my art, and I do know where that's going to send me, and that's back to the hospital usually. And I can stick to my plan, and just figure out how to do art in a different way that's not the same. It's just, I don't want my sister telling me what to do about it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not telling her what to do for her, whatever.
Right.
I want her to trust that I am just doing my best, and it is hard being me. It is hard taking your meds every day for the rest of your life because you might end up in the hospital.
Well, so what you just said to me is really kind of powerful. Could you imagine saying that to her?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it to her quite like that. I realized, like, it would have to be like a time when I'm not so agitated about it, and when she's not so agitated about it. She has been there for me,
Yeah.
She is, she's a pretty good sister, all in all. It's just, it felt like she's threatening me when she says, I'm going to lose my home if I don't take my meds. And it's my meds. It's my head. It's my health.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. These are your choices, and sometimes choices are harder than other ones. So, I think you've said to me before how much it means to you to have a safe place to live and to be with family. So that is a choice you've made in the past, and I think you have a right to always say what's the best for me right now. But I think it sounds like a good conversation that's not in the heat of the moment might really be rewarding.
I mean, I think that's still the choice I would make, but I just don't want this expectation that I'm going to be perfect. And if I ever slip, ever in my life, that she's kicking me out.
Right.
Like, that doesn't feel healthy for me either.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go back to the slide with the prompts on it. But if you could put in the chat box, we're going to start off with, what things did you see in that interaction that you thought were positive, helpful, empathic? And we could probably see things we would have done differently, and I get that. We're going to sort of just take a look at what we could notice about the interviewer's way of trying to engage in a non-judgmental way. All right, the body language, silence. Yes, those that know motivational interviewing, she was definitely rolling with resistance. Yep. Active listening skills. So nodding your head, tell me more, right? Paraphrasing, which is a really great way to use their language, what they want to call it, by using short, like, summaries of what they said. It also helps slow the pace. So if somebody's in a lot of distress and they're racing, it can sort of help kind of slow the pace a little bit to make sure that you're understanding it all and they're able to take some breaths, that they don't have to keep telling you. Nonverbals, right? So she crossed her arms, which one could say whether or not that's good or not. But then she would open them up, like, to say or to communicate, it's about you, I'm listening, which is powerful. Oh, when she acknowledged what he would say to his sister is powerful, right? Empowering, right? That these things that oftentimes people in distress don't have images about themselves that are very positive, but to tell somebody that they have, they're powerful and they can do it and they have the skills, and in a way that's genuine, right? Because if we say it too much too fast and we're not genuine about it, then the person feels like we're just trying to rush them through the conversation. But reflecting that part, it's good. Didn't tell him what to do, but encouraged him to explore different options and how he feels about right. I don't know if you noticed at one point he used the word but, B-U-T. So when you hear the word but in the chat, what does that tell you as an interventionist? When you hear the word but come from the person you're trying to help in response to a strategy, it's an open door. Give everybody a second to think about that. The word but. It's barrier concern, right? They're not fully on board. So I'm always listening for either yes, but, or but, because that may tell me as an interventionist, I'm moving too quickly. I'm not getting enough of the story. We're not breaking it down into a smaller, achievable part. So it doesn't mean that we're not doing things in the direction it needs to go, but we just may need to slow down a little bit. Right. He is hesitant, resistant. Right. He's still trying. He's not sure. Right? But she really displayed genuine curiosity when asking. The nonverbals were amazing, like just really engaged. And you can be empathic in silence just by your body posture, your eye contact. Now, if the person you're working with, we use mirroring a lot in active listening. So if the person you're working with isn't, you can kind of tell they're not comfortable with eye contact, then I don't insist on it, right? So if somebody's not willing to look at me, I grant them that. And I just sort of, try not to do engaged, prolonged eye contact either. If we eventually get there because safety increases, that's great. But all of this is about building rapport, which is really, really critical to getting anywhere with the plan. She recalled statements, right, she sat with him. Oh, great job. She sat with him. She didn't stand up. She didn't have a clipboard. So a lot of times when we're starting off, we don't want to make a mistake as a person who's providing support. So we have our assessments or our, our nice little charts that we're kind of trying to fill out. But if you feel like it's a barrier, go ahead and put it down. You can always say, you know what, that was a really important thing you just said. Do you mind if I jot that down? Because I don't want to forget that as we're working together today. So you can always go back to that and write it down. Sometimes if the person seems really concerned about what I'm writing, I'll even turn it around and show them. And I'll say, here, this is what, you've said, and this, is this all accurate? So sometimes we're able to, work with them on those types of things and show them. And if it's something you can't, you explain why you can't. But if it's about them, most of the time we can share that with them, and that helps them to feel calmer. But not standing over somebody or having that barrier, right, of that clipboard between you. A lot of times when I work, in healthcare, they have these computers in the room, and for efficiency's sake, they want people to be working on the computer while they're interviewing the patient or the client. And as a patient or client, that can make you feel like a number, right? So trying to get people to just ask the question, wait for the response, and then if they have to write it in, then say, okay, I'm going to put this in because this is really important. Using intrinsic motivational interviewing skills as opposed to a checklist, right? Person-centered, right? Resolution focus. So as we walk through building these harm reduction skills, I also want to add that the most powerful thing you have is your gut. And if you're getting a sense that you need to slow down and connect more, or you're getting triggered yourself and you need to take some breaths, maybe engage the person with you and say, I wonder if we could just take a pause for a second and just go through a breathing exercise. I know it always helps me to sort of get my thoughts together. Can we try it? Or a grounding exercise, where you're doing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can, these types of things can really not only help you if you're feeling triggered, it can help the person that you're with. But going with that gut, because sometimes in our work, we do create sort of this parallel experience that can happen. So if we're feeling it, maybe they're feeling it too. So taking a little bit of a slowdown can be a good thing. Excellent job. Anything else that we learned through this that we observed that we thought was helpful that we didn't address? Anything we wanted to see maybe done a little bit better from that list? So I'm going to switch it up for participants now and just sort of have you put in the chat, what are some things that you would have liked to have seen from this list in that brief interview clip? Right, especially as the intervention is saying, I think, I feel, I understand, or because it's not about you. So really trying to reduce, and that's hard. I have found when I get triggered, I want to tell my story. And that's tough. And so when I think about it, I'm like, okay, do I want to tell my story because I'm building a connection and it's going to be helpful to the person? Or do I need to tell my story because I'm feeling triggered and anxious and I need a connection to help me decrease that feeling? So one of the ways that I oftentimes will say to people, if it's an impulsive, intrusive thought, maybe hold on to it. Jot it down if you have to, in a code that you can remember later. And if it comes back as something that you think could be helpful to that person, then bring it back in, connecting it to their goal, to where they want to go. But if it pops into your mind, it might be something that we need to explore later after that encounter with a supervisor or with our own therapist, or whatever mindfulness or work we might be able to do at the end to make a better understanding of why that came up for us in that moment. It is normal that happens. It's just because when we deal with humans, we're building connections, we're finding bridges. Sometimes those bridges are a good route and sometimes maybe not. So that's why I say those intrusive thoughts that we might have, we hold on to them until we know for sure that they can connect to the treatment goal. All right, possibly encouraging, empowering to speak with their right, so that who else can be on the team that they can talk to about their concerns about their medication use. So for people who are, find that there are benefits to not being on their medicines because they are more productive. We find this a lot with artists and musicians, and that sort of burst of creativity that can happen that makes, that's a real euphoric feeling. But then the crash that happens after is oftentimes really disabling, even more so. So how do we help them to be able to still tap into that creativity, take their medicines, and not have that big crash afterwards? And that's something we would want to do in collaboration with the psychiatrist or getting them to talk with them about it. Great. Anything else that you can see in that encounter that you might want to do differently? All right. Well, so I think to keep in mind is that we want to try verbal, nonverbal engaging without judgment. The only thing I'll say is be careful with head nodding, because sometimes that's an active listening skill. Sometimes it can miscommunicate agreement. So there's been a few times in my career where I've actually said, I'm nodding my head because I want to let you know I'm listening, just in case it could potentially get miscommunicated as I agree. So just keep that in mind with that one. But I also don't want you to sit super stiff either, where the person can't feel your empathic energy. And again, finding out what they like to call it, what they think caused it, how they cope, any concerns. Now, the interviewer didn't go specifically into those, but she touched on a few of them. When, he used specific language to describe, that gave her permission to use that language too. And then people around him that might help with coping, how do we maybe bring those people back in, but in a way that feels safer to the person? All right. So we'll go on to the next. So cultural responsivity, cultural humility is really about our own self-reflection. So the National Institutes of Health say it's a lifelong process, and it absolutely is, where we're constantly thinking about what we know and understand about an individual, a group, a belief system, different ideologies, races, and then really critiquing our own selves on our understanding and our ability to connect with people and be curious. And also to know that we're never going to be experts, even if we got a degree in a specific cultural group, that we're never going to be experts on every individual within that group and every experience they have and encountered. So we constantly want to be checking ourselves to make sure we remain in a position of learning and humility, and allowing our clients that we're working with, to teach us about what it is to be a Native American living in their community, to be a Black woman who is taking care of, her family. having them teach us instead of making assumptions based on what we've read or our own experiences. But a lot of this work has to do with examining our own beliefs and our identities, and how can they be strengths in the work that we're doing, and how do we also want to make sure that, we remain curious about other. And through this cultural humility, in this cultural responsiveness kind of comes through. So it goes beyond, again, knowledge and skills that we are saying to the people we work with. We know that there are multiple factors that have resulted in where we're at today. There are historical factors, there are current factors, and there may also be some future factors coming down the line. So we want to understand what those are so that when we come up with a plan of action, we're really being thoughtful. Sometimes we can come up with these incredible plans in the moment, but they're not really practical for when people go, back into the community that they're going to be interacting with. So we need to make sure, and I have done this, I've spent like a long time working on a plan with somebody, only to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you're most likely to take this step, 1 being not, where are you at? And they're like, I'm at a 5. Like, okay, we need to come up with a plan that maybe seems a little more, achievable. So, because sometimes the people we're working with, they also want to please us. And so they're nodding, yes, they're going to do it. They're going to do it because they want that connection. Or sometimes they just want to get the encounter over with. That could be it too. But most of the time it's because they want that positive connection. But we also want whatever we're doing, whatever harm reduction strategy we're using, to be practical and achievable. Cultural responsiveness also means that cultures are not static, which means as, policies change, as the environment changes, groups change, individuals change. So we're constantly going to be a state of learning and understanding. And that's where, the lifelong learners come in. And really, truly, it's about respect and dignity, that each person, no matter what decisions they have made in their lives, in the moment that we're in with them, deserve to feel cared for, respected, and capable. So that is the really, truly most important part when we think about engaging people in a culturally responsive way. All right, I am going to turn this over now to Ariana.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So as we look at what we've already learned today, I want y'all to think about the 4 C's of the culture. So as I tell you my journey, I'm a person who comes from the background of having both my dad in prison and my mother in prison. So already whenever you think about that, I'm enhanced to maybe experience other things later down my life. Now, nobody ever told me this. Whenever I would do therapy, I would go into talk therapy most of the time and never was provided education. Nobody ever told me like, hey, these are the potential things you could later face in your life. So that's what's really in my career today, what drives me as a peer is providing education to the person who's going through the experience. People would tell me, oh, well, because your mother and your father were both addicts, that makes you more likely to be an addict. I later dealt with substance use, but I carried that stigma around with me for a long time. I carried it around with me in school. So I started using substances whenever I was 13 years old. At 13, I was using methamphetamines and anything else I could get my hands on, alcohol, everything, because it felt good and it felt good to escape. It made that ability for me to just feel numb. I never felt connected to anybody but my grandmother. So my grandmother helped raise me while both my parents experienced going to prison. So we look at the 4 C's, that the cause at the original was my parents both being incarcerated, my mother, my father, both being what people would tell me as addicts, and for other people to tell me, you're most likely to be an addict. So at that given time, whenever I started doing substances, I felt lost. I felt dark. I felt just completely alone because people had told me this is your path for so long. This is what you're meant to be doing. So I felt like this is where I'm going to be at. Since being a little girl, I had always dreamed of being on a drill team in Texas. And they have little sparkly outfits. And throughout school, I danced. And so I danced there whenever I was little. I danced whenever I was in middle school, all private practice. So come high school, I said, okay, I'm going to try out for the drill team and I'm going to make it because I have all this experience. Well, I was using substances at that time. The director tells me very specifically, you're not allowed to try out because I've already heard about you. And I already know who you are, and you're not going to bring that to my team. So my only hope at that time was to be able to experience being on a drill team. I'd had that dream for so long. And then one single interaction based off of being the bad kid completely deterred me and sunk me down into further addiction. So I would go back to that counseling and people would just did self-talk. They never taught me how to cope. They never taught me the reasons why I could be using substances. So nobody ever asked what happened. Nobody ever asked, why are you doing this? I got thrown out of multiple schools for aggression and for fighting. And a lot of clinicians to this day know that that is a huge sign of depression. But at that time, nobody ever thought that that could be the case. So I sunk deeper into my depression. I sunk deeper into my substance use. And nobody ever thought the concerns of what could lead me into further helping me. So through high school, I just kind of blended in. I didn't get very good grades. Now I'm actually in school, and it's because I've learned how to address my substance use through it. And I get to use my lived experience to be able to help educate others. Many a times people would say, well, why don't you just stop? And I never knew how to stop. Because the people in the culture I was around in the drug world at that time, that's all I knew. I was escaping my family and going to the streets many of times, and that was my family. So you have to learn to realize who are they associating with and how do you create new communities. One thing a lot of people would think about the abstinence is a lot of people would say, well, here, you just need to be clean from everything. I would take one and then pick up another. And I never knew that that was substituting for that one specific drug. I was always looking to fill that void. Until I learned how to fill that void and how to really learn on what was driving that, then I could never figure out how to be clean or how to abstain from everything. So I just want to leave you with that little piece as we think about the 4 C's, think about the cultural aspect, no matter what the person is going through. Try putting yourself in their shoes and walking alongside them. Because if anybody could have done that with me, I think I would have had more opportunity to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariana. That was really powerful. And we're really going to hear from Ariana more throughout the presentation. So thank you very, very much for sharing. And I also think about, the courage that you're using to make meaning out of it now and helping other people. So thank you very much for all of that. So again, as we talked about earlier, harm reduction, it's a well-researched approach. It is used and the powerful word is to engage people, not to direct people to change, not to, require that people move to one approach or another, but it's about engaging people who use drugs, it could be other things, and equip them, means provide to them life-saving tools and information. So information as well as tools of other types are incredibly important. We make assumptions that people know what they need to do to change, and they don't. A lot of times because they just don't feel worth the investment, or they were not in an environment where they saw anybody able to manage their depression, their substance use, their ADHD. So we really try with harm reduction is to really create an opportunity for this positive change with the hope that eventually saving lives along the way, which is demonstrated that it has done. So the core principles of harm reduction are building community partnerships, reducing risk, and engaging people in a meaningful way. And I think we've talked quite a bit about engaging people in a meaningful way. We will continue to bring that in throughout the training. Reducing risk, which we will continue to do through strategies that we'll talk about. Community partnerships is something I just want to spend a moment on because I think it's incredibly important. And somebody in the chat room had also mentioned, collaborating with the psychiatrist but the more that we're able to be aware of the resources in our community, the more we're able to reduce barriers to accessing those resources. Now, some communities will have more barriers than others simply because of logistics, like rural communities may have exceptionally different barriers and difficulties with community partnerships, potentially, than some urban. Sometimes I've worked in urban communities where there's a wide variety of resources, but that creates confusion because I don't know which one I should go to, which one is going to be the safest, which one is the best, which one is, doesn't have a waiting list that I need to get into. So having these active partnerships can help enhance our work so we know where people get in the fastest, what's having a good outcome, where people have harm reduction supplies that people can access easily, or things that we can take with us to be helpful when we're going out into our community and doing our work. So these community, and there's always new things that are happening, right? Always new nonprofits that are coming up, different treatment options that are coming up. And it's impossible for any one person to be all-knowing about everything. So we really need to find ways to sort of pull together as a system of care. And we can only do that through building those partnerships with our different
Jennifer.
communities. Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to interrupt and kind of give it maybe a tip on that one.
Yes.
Something we had previously done for my work in MCOT was we used the Teams platform, and we had a community resource list. And so with each clinician or peer or whomever, we would put it in the list of, this is my experience with the place, this is why it was helpful. And we would be just collaborating constantly. So as we use that, we would tell each other about it, and we could go back to that specific channel and we could find different ones because, like you said, we're humans. So we might forget. So therefore, we have that list to be able to go back and reuse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that we don't ever get complicit in the list because it's going to be constantly changing and evolving. And I do think we've got some information coming in the chat too. People are putting links in there for different resources. And I really love that. So if you've got some resources that are helpful with harm reduction, I know that there's a few in there from SAMHSA. We can definitely use this as a platform to build partnerships and understanding about our community. Again, the goals of harm reduction, we were kind of going over what are those three fundamental areas: community engagement, I'll pop back just to reducing risk, and then engaging in a meaningful way. So keeping those three components in mind, the ultimate desire and goal is to empower people with substance use disorders. And I want to add their families, and family is loosely defined. It could be, friends, neighbors, partners, anybody that they consider, their primary support system, because oftentimes there are people walking with them in pain and confusion, trying to navigate their way through this, trying to do all that they know to be helpful. And the ultimate purpose is that, they then have this choice that they don't see before them a lot of times in the moment to live healthy, self-directed, purpose-filled lives. And I think we heard in Ariana's story, and maybe others that we've known, is, just the amazing courage and potential that oftentimes gets covered up in self-doubt and fear. So once we're able to start to pull together these powerful systems of support and empowerment, this vision, this possibility that begins to unravel in front of them in a powerful, positive way, leads to something that they never could have imagined. So, but it takes time to get there. And sometimes it could take a very long time. But little positive moments along the way, I oftentimes will tell our interventionists, that we're like farmers. We just are planting seeds of change. And hopefully maybe a month from now, 2 years from now, maybe 20 years from now. And sometimes it can take a long time for people to do this work, but they engage in nurturing that seed, growing into something more than they could ever imagine. But that is doing something where we engage in planting these seeds of hope. All right. So how do we accomplish this? So we treat everybody with compassion. So if it were our best friend, if it were the person we love the most, right, that we lead with that sense, and people can feel that. It's not like we need a lot of words. Sometimes it's a look. Sometimes it's just the way we sit softly in front of them or kneel before them or sit beside them. Sometimes it's the way we just take a silent pause or just nod our head, so that we do that with compassion, without judgment, and without discrimination. Again, acknowledging that everybody deserves the right to be treated with dignity. We're going to talk about utilizing that through the next set of information. So we're going to move more towards harm reduction, specifically as a trauma-informed intervention, this next segment. So what we know is that often people who have lived through physical and emotional trauma are at greater risk for substance use disorders. Many of you in the beginning populated the chat with reasons why people would utilize harmful coping strategies, so that they come from somewhere, whether it was a way to cover, connect, cope, that these strategies stepped into their lives, sometimes, again, at very young ages, as we've learned, sometimes later. A largely underdiagnosed group are older adults as well. So we oftentimes don't spend enough of attention at the ends of the lifespan, sort of really looking at the effects that trauma could have on the choices and the way that people are managing and using substances in its place. We also know, and many of you may have learned, and if you haven't learned about the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences research that's been done, there's lots of really great information out there on this, and certainly let us know. We can provide you with more. But the idea, and we're going to talk about it in the next few slides, is that there's a real deep correlation between the traumas that people have lived through and health outcomes. And a lot of the traumas that we may have experienced as very young people may not manifest physically or emotionally until in our adulthood years. So early intervention is key to helping sort of minimize some of the impacts of the trauma, so that as adults, we don't have to deal with much worse conditions later on in life. And I've worked with people in their 30s who had full-time jobs, families, homes. They were stable. They had survived some really difficult traumas. And then all of a sudden they felt like things were falling apart internally. And they just couldn't make sense of it. Why now? And I've got all these things going for me. Why am I struggling now? And what we can know and understand about trauma is sometimes it comes out when it feels we're the strongest. So it could also be that trauma has a way of sort of working its way, through us at a time where we have the most resources. Sometimes trauma works its way through us at times when we have the least amount of resources. So it doesn't always make sense the way it comes out. And I was just having this conversation the other day with my teenager. She is she manifests her stress physically. So when she gets stressed, she'll get stomach aches. So whereas some people, when they get stressed, they might talk about it with friends or, do different things, maybe would use, but she manifests it physically and recognizing it. But the interesting thing is that, her brain doesn't tell her she's stressed. So we have to really talk about how do we help build those connections between trauma, how symptoms manifest, and then what coping mechanisms we're using to deal with it. So it's the full picture. But a lot of researchers have found that individuals with serious mental illness and substance use, if it's not treated, and at some point, whether it's early intervention or along the lifespan, they will die up to 20 years earlier than the general population. So it is imperative that the work you're doing is truly admirable, getting into, the community and helping people to navigate through some of the most painful, difficult moments in their lives in order to not only save their life now, but even 20 years from now. So think about the impact of that work that you're doing, and it's profound. So when some research looked at even out of 100 people, this is a national study. Now, these numbers can vary a little bit depending on geographic region, but if out of 100 people, 33% would say they had no ACEs, no adverse childhood experiences growing up. And from that, 1 in 16 may smoke, 1 in 69 are alcoholic, 1 in 480 use IV drugs, 1 in 14 have heart disease, 1 in 96 attempt suicide. But look what happens as more ACEs are experienced, right? Those numbers, those ratios dramatically change from 1 in 16 to those with 7+ ACEs to 1 in 6.
So ACEs is one of my favorite studies because of the actual education that it provides to potentially say, like, these are the things that you might be at risk for. Previously, there were genograms, right? And so it was just genograms would tell you, like, these are what you could potentially become versus like what you might experience. And so this provides more education of things to look out for as far as especially the alcoholism, smoking, things like that. So part of my story being somebody impacted by a family member being incarcerated, that is considered to be an ACE, at least one. And so throughout my story, I had more ACEs. I just wanted to include that.
No, that is absolutely powerful. And we can also maybe put a link in the chat to the ACE inventory that you can even go in at your own leisure if you haven't looked at it yet. And you can look at the tool and some of the responses. It's a very simple survey you can take on your own self. And that actually can be very helpful as an interventionist, that you have a sense of what your own ACE is. So you have a working knowledge of impact, and it can give you it can really be information that empowers you as well to make choices and decisions and to really think about your own strength and courage that you've put in place to put yourself in this position to help others. So we can definitely share that ACE inventory with you. I'm connecting this to California in the sense that, a lot of times we have graphics that will come out about our communities. And in this one, it's the state of California. And it just is showing us, this was back in 2019, but the opioid overdose deaths. And you can see the different counties and areas where they were the most severe and the ones that were less severe. And while the purpose of this slide isn't to have you memorize or know where these areas are, it's to show you that perhaps when you're moving into these communities, to being even more mindful about the presence of ACEs and trauma, and to know and to understand that when we're working with people, whether these are people who may have immigrated and not, had a very traumatic experience immigrating, and that's something that we want to keep in mind. People who may be living in communities where there's extreme poverty, lack of access to healthy foods. So they may have food insecurity, housing insecurity, but all of these traumas and this lack of support and resources can contribute to these high rates of opioid use and overdose. So when we're looking at maps, I'm always thinking about what's underneath that and what can that do to help me as an interventionist move forward and help people who are struggling. The next one is another graphic too. Now, you will oftentimes see these come out as well. And this is one about California again in 2019. And the percentage of people who they are finding, and Kara just put Nadine. Oh, yes. Nadine Burks Harris's TED Talk on ACEs is life-changing. It is an absolute great talk, Kara. Thank you. So graphics like this can tell us a little bit about what substances communities are struggling with the most. And it can help us as interventionists to go into our work, having some working knowledge about harm reduction strategies for each of them, because they may and they will be slightly different or largely different from each other. The way that you might approach harm reduction for somebody who's using marijuana versus heroin, right, would be very different. So we want to at least know if there's anything coming up that we want to be aware of. For example, like Flocka use has been really increasing, and the street name for that is gravel. So it is very similar to bath salts. When somebody is using that, it can be very scary for both the people around them, for the interventionist teams, as well as for the person. But if we know that there is an increase in that, how does that change or shape the work that we do, the calls and the crises that we're prepared to serve and go out on, and the strategies that we're going to then use to help people? And it may be that the person in distress from using isn't able to have the kind of conversation that we can really have with them in that moment, but the people around them, we might be able to help. So there's that to keep in mind as well. So really looking at those graphics and then understanding how we can step into those work environments, being prepared, knowing that this is on the rise, this is new coming out, and that's where our community partnerships are helpful. So whether we're talking with our local police department, whether we're talking with some of our rehab centers, what are we seeing? What's on the rise? What's on the decline? What do we need to be prepared for? The other thing is, before we start moving into low barrier treatments, is really understanding what are the more common reasons that we might find for people not seeking treatment. And I sort of started with, the least common down to the most at the end. So, but no openings in a program certainly are a big reason that people won't seek treatment, because we oftentimes, when an individual is ready to maybe take that step, you have a window of opportunity. And if we put in that window of opportunity, you have to get labs done, but at a special space, and then you have to wait. And then maybe that opening in that program might get filled in that time period. So you might have to do this again tomorrow, right? So the more barriers that we put in place between the person and the program, the less likely they're going to be to engage in that. And we might lose them for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years. So really, no openings in a program can be a really significant one. And then we'll talk about rural communities in a second. A belief that the treatment would not help. So sometimes that's just a big step beyond where they're at the moment, but that might be a conversation that we're going to engage with them around is, what is it about the treatment that they don't think will help? Maybe their friend did it. Maybe they did it in the past. Maybe they just heard that it isn't helpful and they just don't understand. That they didn't have time. They might have, some people are functional in their use. So they're working, they're raising children, they're caring for their parents. So it might be that they don't feel they have the time to stop and focus on their own self. They didn't feel a need for treatment at the time. I'm doing fine. I could quit whenever I want to. I've got this. I don't need treatment. That's for people who are really sick, who are, really in trouble with their use. And I could stop. Did not want others to find out. So it also could be an issue where they, really are concerned that if people find out, they might lose their children, they might lose their jobs, it may be real practical, real reasons other than just shame and stigma, but that this could really be a problem in that they'll lose a lot of the things that they have in sense of trying to take care of themselves. The belief that they could handle the problem without treatment, so that sort of ties into number 6 as well, that it might cause neighbors' community to have a negative opinion of them. Then they didn't find the program that offered the type of treatment they wanted. So they might have wanted a partial hospitalization program, or they wanted something, outpatient, or they want something they can go for weekends only. So in their mind, they want something a little more, or online telehealth, but they couldn't find that. So that's a big reason why it just didn't fit. And then the top reason is no healthcare coverage. They couldn't afford it. And that's a real barrier, because either people don't have adequate insurance at all, or the type of insurance they have, that facility only has limited spots or doesn't take it. So that is a huge problem, and up to 20% of the reason people don't. Yes.
Another one that I had found when working with an MCOT team was people's animals. And there's a program in Texas that allowed for people to help kind of foster their animal while they're going to treatment and things like that. So that was always usually a huge barrier, them saying like, oh, I don't have anybody to watch after my animals.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Or some people I've worked with own their own business. So they would have to close their business. They would lose their customers. Their customers would find out that they're using, and the stigma that comes with that, even though they may have been excellent in their job, there's a lot of fear, and that's the way their livelihood, they're supporting themselves. So animals, jobs, dependents, you're absolutely right. So there are some differences in urban and rural barriers, although there's lots of overlap too. So this one was a little tricky to put together, but I will tell you that, there have been a few studies. We need some more recent studies, because since the pandemic, we've had a large increase in the use of telehealth. So, really needing a little more to understand. And then no one rural area is the same as the next. No one urban area is the same as the next. So keeping that in mind, that these are some things that they had found over years, is that in rural communities, there's oftentimes limited behavioral health and detox services. And it might even be there's a limit, even more limited, are people who are culturally connected. So you may want to see somebody who's of a similar faith, race, ethnicity, and cannot find that, or age, and cannot find somebody that fits that. And that's what you would connect with. So very much more limited. People may have to travel long distances to access those services. They're not walkable. There's no bus routes. Cannot afford, or there isn't any, car transportation to be able to get there. Oftentimes rural first responders or hospitals, their staff have limited background and training with the physical effects of a drug overdose. So they may not have the specialists there that know how to understand the symptomatology and then treat it quickly. And a lot of times these interventions have to happen very fast. Law enforcement and prevention programs may be very sparsely distributed. So they might have a prevention program or trained law enforcement in different counties, but not in your county or in your community. Patients seeking the treatment may be more hesitant to do so because of privacy issues with smaller communities, and working with a lot of FQHCs. Oftentimes the front desk people know everybody coming in, right? So it could be the principal of the school. It could be, somebody who lives next door. And so they're really fearful of what that would do to their reputation, to their career, to their trust and respect in the community. So it's difficult in these smaller communities to feel safe coming forward with some of the struggles that they may be having. And then oftentimes other resources, like a lack of adequate housing. So the rural communities may not have halfway houses or safe places for them to transition from residential care to a care environment where they have the supportive resources and some of the boundaries and the structure and the routine that they might need to more permanently adopt new behaviors. So that can be an even more difficult in rural communities. Urban areas, there can be a lack of knowledge about where to get treatment, because it is a big place and there are lots of different types of programs, but I don't know where to get started, or maybe that isn't available in my urban area. There's stigma, again, associated with that on both sides. There can be a lot of wait lists because there's more people. There could also be wait lists, just like there would be wait lists in rural communities. Lack of funding came up over and over and over again. Challenges working with diverse groups. So the more concentrated the area is of people, the more diversity that there may be within those groups, and different cultural groups having different needs in the way they want to connect, receive services, what language they need the services in. All of that becomes much more challenging to meet all the different needs and demands when you're working in more densely populated areas. And then heavy caseloads. We hear that a lot, that people, there's just not enough of you to help support the people that need the help. So heavy caseloads, which then leads to burnout, compassion fatigue, and potentially, rapid turnover. And we need people who are going to hopefully be able to stay in the field or retain all of that wisdom and the knowledge that they've gained along the way. We have to find a way to support our interventionists. Okay, so we're going to check in with you all. So in the chat, if you can just put, what are some other barriers to care that you see prevent access and retention in substance abuse treatment, other things that may not have yet been mentioned? And if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that too. Transportation, over and over again. Yep. Right. Childcare, pet care, as we learned before too. Language. Even if they don't own their own business, being able to get time off of work without losing, absolutely. Language. If you're paycheck to hour to hourly wage, or don't have time built up, or the benefits, absolutely. Funding, stigma around medical assisted, therapies, immigration status, right, lack of empathy. Emma, would you mind unmuting yourself and talking about that lack of empathy as a barrier? Would you feel comfortable?
There we go. Thank you. Sorry, it wouldn't allow me to unmute.
Oh, good.
Yeah, just a lack of empathy in medical professionals. There are a lot of people who have the just quit mentality, and that's just, as we all know, not how addiction and substance use disorder works in the brain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emma. Judgment. Absolutely. Fear of judgment. Danielle, do you want to unmute and talk about that for a second?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that a lot of the times people are still in a place where they maybe haven't reached that level of acceptance of wanting to get treatment. And so they oftentimes are coerced into treatment as a harm reduction strategy, or, a focus, when there's a huge difference between harm reduction and treatment. And in order to be in treatment and to be as successful as possible, you have to be ready and willing to do it. And if someone is still trying to learn how to manage and learn about their coping and their symptoms and how, their own behavior, then they're not ready for treatment. And so it's being able to recognize that these are two different worlds, and how do we make sure that somebody is ready for the treatment world versus the harm reduction world.
Excellent. And that much of the work we're doing is building a bridge for them to be able to cross over into treatment. Right. Everyone in your circle uses substances, and you love them, and they're your people. They're your coping, even though it may not be helpful coping. It's scary to give up those individuals that you've been with for so long. And I have worked with lots of people where that is one of the more difficult pieces, is stepping away from people that they truly love that may not be healthy for them. So fear of not knowing or understanding the treatment process, which is where a lot of you will come in and helping break down some of those myths about treatment and fearing change. Great job, everybody. So stages of change. So some of you may have heard about stages of change. So I'm just going to be going over it, but I'm not going to do an exhaustive scope into motivational interviewing because that's a different training. But it is important to know that change is difficult, and it's going to look different for each of the people that we work with, because sometimes good things also have challenging pieces to them. So good change can come with drawbacks. And it's not so much that the person's afraid of change or so in love with the old way of doing things, but it's the place in between that's the scariest, right? It's that jumping between one thing to another. Will I make it? Will I fall? Will it hurt when I land? Will I have support on the other side? Will I leave behind things from moving forward to this other place that I'm going to miss? If I take this step and I fail, there's nothing else. And that fear of failure can also be paralyzing for people as well. So they talk about it. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. On the teams that will incorporate peers, that's probably the best space for them, is to be able to share their lived experience in those times, because you're exactly right. Those times do come. And so to be able to provide them and share with them how they got through them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I love the metaphor. It's like being on a trapeze, right? If I let go, will I catch? And what happens if I fall, or it's like Linus with his blanket in the dryer, will it come out? Will it forever fall where all the socks go, right? And that this fear that there's nothing in that interim to hold on to, but our faith and our belief in ourselves and the empowerment that people are trying to support us in feeling to make that reach that next grab. Excellent. And the stages of change with this, and there's a link embedded in the deck that you'll get that you can go in and learn a little bit more about this. But oftentimes, we're going to start off with pre-contemplation, which we're not even thinking about changing. We're hoping that moves to contemplation, where we start thinking about it, preparation, and getting determined that we're going to do it. So starting to put plans in place on what we'll do with our pets, or what are we going to do with income if we're the sole earner, or to taking that step and walking into a treatment situation. And then how do we maintain that change? So, and sometimes throughout that journey, there's that relapse process that'll creep into that, but that doesn't mean that we can't re-enter a different stage of change. So it's normalizing that for people we might encounter, we might meet them when they're pre-contemplation, when they're contemplation, when they're in relapse, finding out where they're at in that stages of change and where they want to go to next and how ready they are to get there. So some things to keep in mind regarding stages of change is we never want to persuade somebody by saying, I think you should, or scaring them into change. I've seen lots of interventionists that tell them about all the horrible things that'll happen if they don't change, thinking it'll scare them. And I've forever spent my career working with people where I'm trying to provide them with the research and the evidence that lectures and scare tactics do not work. It may be a temporary, thing that shocks somebody into saying they're going to do something different, but we know long-term wise, that is not going to be the greatest way to get the most people towards change. So persuasion is not it. And it doesn't really build up what we want, which is the person's own belief and intrinsic motivation for change. And we can really hurt people by doing more persuasion than by engaging in a change process that works for them. It's being aware of their resistance and their guardedness and respecting that, refocusing on the goal to really reduce harm, not eliminate risky behavior. What we want to do is reduce harm and empower people. And then these are just some strategies. So if somebody's pre-contemplative, you want to use empathy and understanding, and that's it, right? If they're thinking about it, we want to explore, and then, any ambivalence they're having, just understanding that a little bit more. If they're preparing, you want to really help them set a plan in place that's realistic and achievable and within their reach. If it's action, if they're in the throes of doing it, then really getting behind them like a coach, cheerleader, you can do this, and really supporting that self-efficacy. If they're in maintenance, it's really helping them to keep aware of potential triggers for use. And if it's relapse, it's sort of helping them to understand we can roll with this. We reassess what we need to do. We revise the plan because maybe the plan needed some revision, and then let's re-enter it again. So you can kind of see some of the interventions that will align with each of those stages. Okay, and I know we've just got a few more things. I just want to quickly get through the next few slides, just to introduce harm reduction strategies, because this is one of the things that we want to remind you about again. And Ariana did this in the beginning, is that some of the content could be triggering with some of the strategies. So we really want you to just take care of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. Whether you want to get something cold to drink or just take some breaths. If you find yourself sort of drifting off, that might be your own way of managing whatever is happening for you in that moment. It's okay. Come back and reconnect. I told Ariana one good thing is looking at her background and pick something in the background that you want to be interested about for a few seconds. Give your brain a break and then reconnect. So substance use overdose risk. So having a history of overdose risk increases future overdoses. So it is really important that when we go through the assessment in future trainings, you'll be asked to work with people and understanding more about their history so we can understand potential future risk. People with substance use disorders are at greatest risk also for infectious diseases. So some of the harm reduction strategies are going to be designed to help reduce some of those risks. Some of the symptoms of use can take years to develop. So people will say, I'm smoking and I'm fine. It's not affecting my job. It's not affecting my motivation. It's not affecting my financial situation. But as their use continues to increase or change, some of the symptoms and from that can happen over time. And then also, the risk can occur in contaminated needles, bodily fluids like breast milk. Also, when we're having sexual relations through vaginal fluid, semen, and anal fluid. So their substance use can change the way we think about the risks that we're taking and put us in really vulnerable positions. And we want to set harm reduction goals that minimize overdosing, contracting, and spreading infectious disease. Our goal is to keep people alive. We want to reduce risks for death, overdose, again, infectious disease, maintaining trust and hope in an empathic way. All right. And these are just some strategies that we can use for reducing harm. We are going to go through just a few today, but we wanted to at least provide you with a variety. Some of these are more plentiful in California. Some of them may not yet be accessible in different communities. So that's why we need to know what's available in our communities so that we can be effective in our work.
So in my story, I got into substance use. I started using, and then I experienced a trauma. And this trauma was really large for me. It happened over a few years where I continuously lived in that trauma, the thoughts, everything about it. And going through it, I lived in a rural community. So we spoke about rural communities and what that could look like earlier. So being in a rural community, there were lack of resources. There were lack of information. At that time, there was no true harm reduction. So as I went through it, I had told my grandmother years before now, I really wanted to help others experience what I experienced today. Through that time, I was so lost because no provider could really connect. It was that self-talk. There was no true solution in the services. And so therefore, I stayed lost in the system for a long time until I came out to incarceration myself. So I completed that cycle of incarceration with my family. I too became incarcerated for 2 years. And during that time, I was introduced to what was harm reduction and things like that. Now my incarceration it forced me to abstinence. So that kind of helped in my solution. Later I got out, I went to a urban city. So I moved to Houston and I learned more practical tools to be able to use in harm reduction and through my journey, because now I not only have trauma from my past, but I have trauma from my incarceration as well. And so I have to learn on how to cope with the things that I might experience in re-entering society. And how does that work with having a substance use history and having all these new stimulating things, because you don't have as much stimulation whenever you're incarcerated. So it was new, but I had a lot of good providers be able to introduce me to harm reduction and be able to put me and remind me that I could have hope. I could have these things happen for me. I was introduced to what peer support was, and peer support for me was the peace. It was like, hey, you can make an honest earning living for yourself, and you can go back to school, and you can do well. And then I had worked in the provider with MCOT and with everybody around me, my program director, my supervisor, they were all supportive of me going to school. So therefore, that was a piece of my harm reduction as well, is being able to support me through my education and be able to show like, hey, this is possible. That's how I ended up getting my degree, is going through that spot. Learning different ways of how to manage my substance use disorder, learning ways to manage like what life looks like re-entering society, and then being provided hope that I can too recover. And then that is my piece to where I provide hope for others as well. Thank you.
So I just want to, Ariana, one thing, so your first introduction to harm reduction was when you were incarcerated. Do you remember like what that turning point conversation was?
I remember very specifically thinking like, why was I never told about these things? Why was I never introduced to this? And by the time incarceration happened, I only had the option for abstinence for me at that point.
Right. But that was where you were first exposed to it. And then what was the first experience you had with harm reduction after that, outside of the system? Like, do you remember that as well?
Yeah. So I remember coming back into re-entering society, right? And I'm still around the people I love. I'm still around the people that use, and a lot of them were my family members too. So therefore, learning how to implement strategies in my life and not use behind it. So one of them being, my largest one was a coping tool is just to remove myself. That was the first one. Remove myself. People, especially at certain times, I would start to learn like, hey, they're about to crank up the notch. Like they're no longer like nicely drinking. They're about to crank up the notch into like hardcore shots. Things like that are about to happen. So therefore, I would just be like, hey guys, have a fun time, but I'm out.
Wow. I can't even imagine the courage and then the hopeful pride that you had in yourself when you're able to successfully do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the reinforcement of the providers who taught those things to me, right? Of like, okay, this works. So therefore, let's keep doing this because nothing else has worked before.
That's a big, and that's a strategy that people might think is not a big deal, but that's a huge deal, right? We think much more medical as an intervention, but that's so much more practical and so much more patient-centered, person-centered. So that's the work.
Another one for me was having Topo Chico. Like if we would go to like a bar for actual company events almost. And so I would go in there with the people who supported me already, and they kind of keep me accountable. But yeah, I would have Topo Chico instead. And so if anybody were to ask, hey, do you want a drink? I would show them, hey, no, I got one. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So these strategies. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is really amazing. Thank you. All right. So we're going to sort of go back and talk a little bit about some specific strategies. So I want to remind you at the very beginning of the training, we said we don't expect you all to be experts at the end or to feel fully confident that you're going to go out and be able to deliver all of these flawlessly. This is about being on a journey, just like the people we're going to be, working with, of self-discovery, skill discovery. So some of these things today are meant to give you some strategies that you can use and that you can continue to build upon. So the first strategy that we're going to talk about is planning a substance use schedule. So that may seem very different than what people would expect for us to come in and do. But when we're doing harm reduction, that can be helpful in so many levels. That way the person can maybe think about, okay, how much could I use and prepare accordingly so that I don't overdose? If I haven't used in a while, there's a tendency to want to go back to the amount they were using when they last decreased or stopped. And that's where overdose harm increases dramatically. So how do we set up a plan if that's something they're doing is on this journey of using again? What can they do to put into plan something that will keep them safe? Maybe in that plan, it can include scheduling at least one abstinence day in the week. So if they were to have one day where they didn't use, what day would that be easiest? And then let's build on, maybe it's a half a day. Maybe it's, where they use. Maybe it's with whom they use. Maybe it's what Ariana shared earlier, it's, seeing that use is increasing and walking out of the room. So how can you put a plan into place and then using one drug at a time? So if they're going to use, what would the drug be that they would use? And then if they had other drugs, they tendency to use with it, could they make a commitment to self and to their plan to not do any others? So whether it's alcohol, marijuana, or vaping. Go ahead, Ariana.
So Jennifer, I was having a conversation with somebody today actually about the use of one drug at a time. And that's always an interesting one, because when providing education about drugs and what they do to the body, it's good to provide that education to the person, because the person might not understand what it's actually doing. So you could prevent yourself. We had a conversation about GHB and them combining another drug with it. And it was quite interesting because he stopped and he paused and he said, well, if I would have known that this combination could have potentially been lethal, I might have rethought it and said, I don't want to die today. Wow. So things like that are very effective in providing education to the person using substances.
Absolutely, good point. And sometimes people don't understand that these are two stimulants, and what would that do to my heart and my body? Or these are two depressants, what would that do to my heart and my body? So combining alcohol with Xanax, so these are the things, and even though somebody else may have said, oh, I've done that, I didn't have any problem. We never know what our bodies are going to do, how they're going to react or respond. So
right. And as a provider, we might think like these are normal things to talk about, but to provide that education to the person, because it's not normal conversations they get to have in their daily lives. So being able to provide that space to have those conversations.
And Julie, do you want to unmute and talk about your point? Because I think it's a really good one too with prescribed meds.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, again, just having like a more candid conversation like Ariana is saying, because how often do we go to the doctor and they give us sort of like don't mix this or don't do that. And I think sometimes it goes one in one ear and out the other for all of us. So just reminding them as well that whether it's a medical medication or a psychotropic medication, that can also be potentially very dangerous, and having a frank conversation about that, just so that they have the awareness and know the risks for it.
That's right. Because sometimes people compartmentalize, these medicines that I'm given by my doctor, and then these ones that I'm using apart from that. And they don't think about the crossover, just like, we don't think about how vitamins and naturopathic remedies that we might use can interact with things that were prescribed or other substances. So absolutely. There's also talking with them about ways to reduce frequency, intensity, like going low and slow. So can we start with the lowest dose possible, then wait, see if it achieves the effect that we want, versus taking more like we may have previously or because it's available, and then running the risk of overdosing. And then keeping track of your responses. So if I used this much and I felt this effect and I was still able to do these things, then maybe that's a safe dose for me. Just as a way to sort of build in, again, these safety steps so that as they're reducing or making changes in their use, they're able to reduce harm. And then increase very slowly until they achieve the desired goal. Okay, Gina Duran, go ahead. Oh, she raised her hand and clapped. Which one do you want to do, Gina?
I meant to raise my hand. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Go for it.
So I love this, and I see the need for it, and having these discussions. The one thing in the back of my mind, all the alarm bells are going off, because it says no, county agencies don't want to do harm reduction. So I know it's learning something new. I've been in with the agency for 10 years, and I know that this, mental health it's changing, but it's hard for me internally to override that when internally, and I want to talk to my leadership, because I see how it's changing. But I remember in the past, it would be like, no, we have a zero tolerance.
Mm-hmm. And that can be a very big challenge when I think of other places that I've worked with. And sometimes when you're internal to the system, it's very difficult unless you have some sort of power in the system to make change. So it might be having like a guest speaker or somebody coming from outside the system that can help introduce some changes that are happening. But it is a very good point. I agree. And David sort of reinforcing that, we are accountable at time. We're accountable to what our employees are asking us, but how do we advocate for new research, new things that are coming through that can be safer and helpful? So really good points. Okay. The second strategy is safer injection drug use. So things like educating how smoking and snorting are less risky than injecting. So people may not know and understand that. And if we can encourage some harm reduction around that, clean surfaces, extremely important for preventing contamination. So if we're going to use, instead of, using on a surface that isn't clean, and oftentimes people are going to use closest to where they were able to secure what they need. Could they use a newspaper or something, paper towel, to be able to at least create a safer surface than what was underneath it? Always use sterile liquids, water that's not from toilets or places that are community accessible that may not be sterile. And they talk about boiling it in the cap without the drug is one way to be able to maybe kill some of the bacteria that's in that water that they're thinking of using. Always try to encourage them to carry an overdose reversal kit, whether it's for themselves or for somebody that they may be using with. And when you're going to be using those kits, knowing that the first thing is to call 911, then use the kit, and then ask questions, right? So it is really important that the person gets that reversal medication as quickly as possible, but we're also bringing in medical professionals because that's a temporary support tool. They're definitely going to continue to need some medical intervention after. And then encouraging people to use new syringes at each use. Don't share syringes and don't reuse syringes. And with that slide, there's a hyperlink too. And looking for syringe programs in the community that you're in as well, so that you can point them to where they can get access, whether they can order it online or whether they can access through a public health department or some other nonprofit in their community where they're able to get new needles. Strategy 3 is staying with the same dealer. The dealers are trying to make money off of the people that are buying from them. So oftentimes what will happen is if a dealer is aware that people are getting sick or dying from something that they purchased from them, they're going to stop, carrying that particular batch or giving it out because they don't want to lose their clients. So if they recommend, encouraging people to stay with the same dealer to reduce contaminated drugs. If it's a trusted dealer, to help avoid fentanyl-laced drugs, or it's an overdose prevention strategy that, could really help protect people. And if they're unable to access a trusted supplier, oftentimes that is, research has found, an incident or event that precipitated an overdose. So it's when they moved from their trusted supplier to a new supplier, the risk for overdose went up dramatically. So while the goal is to not have people using with the same trusted dealer is safer than moving to one that we're not aware of. Strategy 4 is the fentanyl testing strip. So there is lots of information, and that's also hyperlinked. The testing kits you can oftentimes, again, order online. Some have marginal costs. You might be able to get them free from different distribution centers in your communities. But it's just a small strip of paper that can detect the presence of fentanyl in different types of drugs. And it can, because oftentimes it is mixed or obviously concealed. And then this just goes through the different steps. So you would put a small amount of the drug in a dry, clean container, add, sterile water to the container mixed together. And then you put the test strip in, let it absorb for about 15 seconds. When you pull it out, a positive result would be a single pink line on the left-hand side. So you would have to see the strip to know whether it's left or if it's right, if it's positive, if it's negative. And they also recommend doing it twice, just in case it got contaminated or something went wrong with the test process, or maybe it's a bad strip. But we really would prefer people come up with 2 negatives before using, just to make sure. And then this is a little bit about where fentanyl test strips can be purchased. They're about $1 each, and there's several different vendors. They're also hyperlinked. And then there's a syringe services program that's in California through California Harm Reduction Supplies Clearinghouse that you can also direct people to, and then check with your county health department for, again, availability of free test strips. And these are some instructional videos. So if you want to learn more about, explaining to people how to test for fentanyl, there's a training video that you can use. There's a brochure and instructions. And I did check all of those links. And as of last night, they all work really well. So hopefully that will work for you. And you can just take the time to get a little more information about that if you don't know much about it. Strategy number 5 is to not use drugs alone. So this can involve being on the phone with somebody while you're using a video call, so FaceTime or other, or staying with the dealer and at least having somebody observe you using in case you are evidencing signs that there is an overdose and intervention is needed. And so there's some resources through here that you can access. There's a 1-800 number and a website that they have trained volunteer operators that can also stay on the phone with somebody during use. So if somebody doesn't say they don't have anybody, they don't feel comfortable, staying with the dealer, then we can at least give them this number and say, if you're going to use, this is a harm reduction strategy where at least somebody can be on the phone with you. And then there are some technology apps that can monitor our movement, breathing patterns, and can kind of tell when an opioid overdose is perhaps happening, and emergency services can then be activated. So while we don't have any specific ones we're endorsing in this training, we do encourage you to sort of look into some that could be available and accessible to the people that you're serving in the community. Okay, again, using clean needles. If we're using in a group, try to use the needle first. And I know that sounds really terrible, but for safety reasons, if you're the first one, chances are you're going to be using a needle that isn't contaminated, so you're lowering your risk. So explaining, if there is one needle being shared, being the first one to be able to use it. There's also some information that we can give them on how to get sterile drug use supplies from harm reduction programs. Now in California, the law does permit individuals to have sterile syringes for personal use along with safer drug supplies. So this is protected by California law. It also permits the purchase of sterile needles without a prescription from pharmacies. However, pharmacies are not required to comply. So it is, again, community partnership, finding out which pharmacies in the community that we could potentially direct them to that would support them in this harm reduction strategy.
So in my experience as well, I've known people in Louisiana, we're very close to the Louisiana border, they would provide 100 needles. And so if the dealer were to go get the 100 needles plus the supplies, the dealer would then be able to sell it as well. And even though they're not being charged, they're providing their clientele or their customer clean, safe options to be able to use it. And it would benefit. It was a working relationship between the person who is using it and the person who is selling it.
Wow, that's powerful. Good. Strategy 7 is practicing sexual health precautions. Again, condoms is a barrier method during sexual activity. Lubricant to minimize tears and exposure to blood. Taking PrEP antiviral medication to reduce chances of getting HIV from sex or injection drug use. Getting tested, encouraging them to get tested regularly for HIV, hepatitis, which is also contagious, and other STDs. And there are free testing sites, so finding out where they can go to get tested in their communities. Like a lot of times the community clinics, sometimes public health departments. And we really want to direct them to places where they offer harm reduction strategies, because as we learned from one of the participants, not every place will be engaging in harm reduction strategy services and supports. So we want to make sure we're not sending somebody to a place that wouldn't support that. Strategy 8's in 2 parts. So just medication for addiction treatment. So your MATs, if you aren't aware of what these are, methadone is one of the most widely used for treating opioid addiction. It's got several different forms, but most people will take it orally as a liquid. It is long acting. What it does is it helps alleviate cravings and withdrawal symptoms. So it keeps people functioning where they can have their jobs, do the things they need to do. And then the methadone sort of keeps them from getting sick and from stepping into more use again. So it is a strategy. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's very, very difficult for people to go completely off of that, because not just for the medication benefits that it's giving them, but it's a psychological loss. When they have successfully been able to use methadone and not use other forms of, opioids, that they've been able to really be able to function better and live, in the way that they want to safely. That last 5 milligrams, it can take a lot of work to be able to help people to feel safe coming off of that. But they can and they do. So there's buprenorphine, which is a medication that, again, is taken daily, orally. It's a disintegrating tablet or a film, or even an implant that slowly releases the medicine over 6 months. The risk of overdose for that is lower than methadone. So if somebody should get a handle on a lot of methadone, they still could overdose on that. The risk is less for this. And also withdrawal symptoms are less severe if it's combined with naloxone or Suboxone. It can also be used to discourage injection use of that medicine. And then the last one we'll talk about is naltrexone. This blocks the effects of opioids to minimize the high. So it doesn't allow you to kind of get to that place where you're getting that same level of intensity. So it sort of blocks some of that effect. So it sort of makes us lose our desire to, because it's chasing that high that was the original reason for increasing and continuing the use. It does not help with withdrawal symptoms, though, and it cannot be taken until like 7 to 10 days after your last opioid use, because it can worsen withdrawal. So there's a timing issue. So that's why it really has to be given with medical intervention and support. And it's available in extended release injectable form that lasts for 30 days. So strategy 9 is to keep naloxone or Narcan available and visible. This is an opioid overdose prevention medicine. It's FDA approved. It's used to quickly reverse the signs of an opioid overdose by blocking the receptor sites, and it helps to restore breathing. It's available in injectable, nasal, auto-injectable. It's really good for people and their families who use heroin or love and know a heroin user to have a person who's using heroin, my apologies, keeping this available in their homes in case of an overdose risk. It's a temporary treatment, so it's critical that, again, they get a medical intervention as soon as possible after administering it. So really, it's call 911, administer it, and then talk to the individual and find more about what happened. Okay. Medi-Cal Mobile Crisis Service benefit requires at least one member of the crisis team to carry it and be trained to administer this. So just so you're all aware of that. And this just tells a little bit about how it's administered. And so if you want to, there's a YouTube video about administering it. So if you want to learn more about how it's given, it is a nasal spray, intramuscular, subcutaneous. You can learn about the different forms, so you're prepared to give information as well as support if needed. Candidates who are good for this, or people who take high doses of opioids for long-term management of chronic pain. So if something should happen and they're not able to get access to their opioids, they can have a bad reaction as well. So we want to make sure that we know and are aware that they're a good candidate for Naloxone. Receive rotating opioid medication regimens. People who have been discharged from emergency care following an opioid poisoning or intoxication are somebody that we want to encourage to have this. People who take certain extended release or long-acting opioid medications, and people who've had a period, we talked about this earlier, a period of abstinence, to include, and especially if they're recently released from incarceration and there is a high risk that they might go back to using, that they have that on their person. And this is a little bit from a link that you can go to SAMHSA for the Opioid Overdose Prevention Toolkit. Also a link to the California law that requires prescribers to offer a prescription for this or another drug approved by the US FDA. So it tells you a little bit about the law and gives you some more information. And just some general myths is that a myth of it is that it makes people violent. That is not true. That is a myth that it will keep users from seeking treatment, that we can't trust the person who is high to respond appropriately to a life-threatening situation. Actually, that is absolutely a myth, that there's oftentimes an environment where people do take care of each other, even though they're using together. So that it's really important that we get these kits in the hands of these people to support not only for themselves, but for each other. If you have an overdose antidote to drug users, the myth is that they'll abuse more, and there is absolutely no research that supports that as well. Another myth is that only medical professionals can determine if somebody has overdosed and give it, and that is absolutely untrue. People who are around, people who have used drugs are very aware, and it is really important that we put these resources into our communities. The other thing is it will prevent drug users from calling 911 for further assistance, and that's not true as well. And there are legal protections, and that's hyperlinked for anybody who administers it. So if people are afraid, well, if I administer it and I don't do it correctly, or it doesn't work, or what if I do it and that person gets mad at me, they're going to sue me. But there are legal protections that will support those individuals in administering it. All right. And then the last thing is just, making sure that we're talking with supervisors if we have challenging situations. Harm reduction approaches can be very difficult, and we need support just as much as we're giving it. So making sure we have access to our supervisors, and really helping people to move past these strategies or belief systems like abstinence only, that there are more opportunities to help people move towards reduced use and no use. But we need to really use those supervisors as our anchors in times where we're not sure what to do or how to make a strategy that's going to be person-centered, culturally responsive, and honoring this person's trauma. It's likely that you're still going to have questions when you're working with people in the field. So there is a phone number here for clinician-to-clinician support that Danielle put in this, which I think is really a wonderful resource. So I would definitely write that number down. And for 24 hours, 7 days a week, you always have somebody you can reach out to if you're not sure what to do or how to be helpful. And then really checking in with your supervisor or program leads if you're unsure where to seek consultation or even after a situation where you've been out in the field and you might be struggling with what happened, to seek that support. Okay, so we're going to skip the let's check in for right now because I want to move to this case study real quickly, just to get some audience, your participation with this. But you receive a call for service from a 30-year-old who has recently been released from a court-ordered substance use treatment program and is in crisis due to unstable housing and a fear that she will violate her probation. She has a history of alcohol, marijuana, and IV heroin use. She discloses that she only completed the treatment to avoid a longer jail sentence, and she does not feel that she can sustain sobriety. She expresses that her cravings are becoming unmanageable and she wants to get her hands on heroin ASAP. She shares that she's feeling out of control and at this point will consume the first thing she can get her hands on to get high. So one of the questions is, what additional information would you like to know about this person? And Ariana, feel free to jump in as well. So what additional information would we want to know about this individual?
I think it's important to know, especially being released from a court-ordered substance abuse. So having court-ordered, meaning you probably have some type of criminal charge. What type of criminal charge do you have? Do you have a substance use like distributing? Because a lot of the times housing places will not provide housing to people with certain charges. So knowing your resources to who provides that housing is a huge thing to know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are other people chiming in. What supports does she have? Right. What natural support does she have to aid her in her sobriety? Thank you, Gina. Any other information might we want to ask about cultural factors that could play a role in this? So we might want to know a little bit more about what's going on for her in her support system. If she's going to use, is she willing to make a plan for safe use? Okay. Right. Where is she at with the stages of change, right? Is she pre-contemplative? Is she contemplative? Is she in relapse? And so how are we going to sort of help her to be able to navigate the stage that she's in and not expecting more, but also for her not underestimating, remember.
And like Angel said the last time she used as well, in what she wants to use the most, because even though you might have a history of certain things, one might be a little more than the other of the cravings of wanting to use.
Absolutely. How using substances functions for her? Absolutely. Remember, call, cope, care, concern. Those were all things that we can ask about as well. Does she have friends and family who can keep her accountable and support her, right? Is everybody around her also sort of in a similar situation? So, is there anybody around her that can be an anchor for her in reducing her use? Right. Does she know who she plans to get motivations for not using? Excellent. You all are doing a great job. All right. How would you engage this person? How do you think you can build a connection? Explore her spirituality. Brandon, do you mind unmuting to share that?
Yeah, I would just say that I believe there's a difference between spirituality and being religious. And I think we're all spiritual beings, no matter where we seek towards a higher truth, whether it be love, religion, power, money, whatever it is. I think we're all spiritual beings. And this is something definitely to connect to, and what works for their clients, and what works for our clients, essentially.
Be a huge part of their coping, right? Excellent, Brandon. Validate her honesty. Absolutely. Okay, and that's how we can also engage. Right. What harm reduction strategies might be helpful to offer this person? Arrange immediate face-to-face contact and continue building rapport. Absolutely, Jacob. What harm reduction strategies might be a place to start? There's some of the ones we talked about.
Providing her information at least, or to really explore information to see what she already knows and what we can provide her more information on as far as resources to connect her if she does use. These are the things that are in place for you.
Right. Would we want to see if we can get her some supplies, some safe supplies, right? So how can we connect her to places? So if using is something that is going to happen, what can we do to help reduce risk? And what resources are available in her community to be able to do that? Building also an opportunity for her to get a Narcan kit, perhaps, so that she at least has some resources available to her, because we know that's the greatest risk to prevent overdose. Great. Excellent. People are chiming in. Absolutely. Reduce risk, right, Danielle? Safe, clean supplies. Overdose all. Yep, absolutely. And then what are some ways a mobile crisis team can support this person on following through on their goals? So as we think about implementing harm reduction strategies, engaging, what are some ways that we can make sure that we're building out a harm reduction plan that we can continue to support the follow through? And these are things we'll definitely be talking about in other trainings, but just wanted to see what some of your thoughts were.
I could say in our experience, working on an MCOT team is we would make a time of following through, of being like, hey, let me follow up. Let me see how things have been going, and telling them when we're going to follow up, how we're going to follow up. One of the best strategies for using with teens is following up via text messages and letting them know, like, if they don't have to verbalize anything. They can just say, like, thumbs up, like everything is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love, and the thing is that oftentimes when you're supporting people in the change process, they're so used to people not doing that when you do it, it feels like a connection that many have not had before. So to have somebody actually say they're going to do something and follow up is a big deal. It makes them feel oftentimes seen, cared for, building trust in a system that previously they felt couldn't be trusted. So I always, caution our teams. We want to make sure that, we schedule and do things that we can follow up on, but it is really, really, it is impactful when we do say, hey, you were on my mind and we had talked about, talking today, and I wanted to check in with you. And that can be a huge step in helping them to build that self-efficacy, but also start to build trust in the system again.
And I found ways to remind myself, because life gets busy, being out in the field gets busy. So what I learned is how to do like hearing reminders with my Outlook. I would put like little reminders of like, check in with so-and-so, and I'd hear the 15-minute bell kind of ring prior to the reminder. And I'd be like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be at this time and in the right mind space. So I would make sure that I could be in the position to be able to help that person if something didn't go as planned.
Right. And I like how you said the right mind space, because if we're feeling it's a task, they're going to feel that too. So taking a breath, sort of like, if we just had one experience with somebody else, we want to just do something to sort of help calm ourselves, get our respiration rate under control, and just center ourselves on where we're at so that we can transition to the next conversation. So that doesn't carry over into it, because you're absolutely right. We can be going task to task as providers. We certainly don't want to communicate that to the people we're trying to care for.
And music was my best one, to be able to decompress from each task.
That's did you have a favorite song?
I like Ariana Grande, believe it or not, a lot.
Ariana Grande too. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think finding something that is a neutral, uplifting, or calming song is really pretty good. No judgment on the types of music you like. All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Ariana, who's going to finish us out with some of her lived experience, and then we'll go over some final slides and open up for Q&A.
Right. So, like, as we've already mentioned, the different forms of harm reduction, I want you to think about where I said in my point that it was helpful to learn about the education. So, as I was given this education, whenever I re-entered society, I still went back to my community. I still went back to the people around me, even though I never picked back up. That was very fortunate and lucky to me because I was provided with those tools and I was provided with the resources given to me whenever I got out. I knew how to get to my providers on the bus. I was provided, so like a lot of places, they'll do a map. And that just means like what's your ability to pay. Coming out of incarceration, I had no ability to pay. I didn't have a job yet. And the place that provided me with like my medication for my mental health was at a zero map, meaning I didn't have to pay anything out of pocket. That was huge for my recovery. If I did not have that, then who knows where my recovery would be at today. That medication started whenever I was in prison, and then it followed me whenever I got out. But it was important to know the resource of it and how to access it accessibly from wherever I was at within the city, because I was in a very urban populated at that time. I came from a rural community where I recently moved back to, and they don't have access to medication like that yet. I hope one day that they do, but they don't have it as low cost as I had it in a more urban, because they had more funding. So being provided that information, you go back to your communities and you're able to educate others. You're able to then share knowledge with other people, and you'll run across the person maybe you used to use with because you're still in the same community. And then you're able to give them a kit of maybe being able to use naloxone, or being able to prescribe at that, or not prescribe, sorry, I blanked. Being able to, but I'm using the word of like administer. That's the word I'm looking for. Being able to administer things and being able to teach them how to use those things in their community. Because a lot of the times they might not get access to providers right away. And so you're giving them the encouragement every day to be able to then access those services themselves, because you're encouraging them of like, hey, it helped me, so maybe it might help you as well. So at this point, I believe we're going to open it up to comments or questions and final reminders.
Absolutely. So just the final reminders we'll go through as people are formulating some questions is that mobile crisis response is at its core a harm reduction strategy. So we know we have a very brief amount of time, to walk with somebody in their crisis to help get them to a place of possibility and hope, and to feel empathy and support. So the harm reduction strategies are really effective at setting person-centered, culturally responsive goals. Harm reduction provides the opportunity to give non-judgmental, trauma-informed, compassionate care, positive regard, meeting people where they're at, and it does not strive to leave them there. So it's not like we're just trying to reduce risk. We're not trying to get them to stop using, but we don't start with the stop using. Right. So we start with the reducing risk, meeting them where they're at. And I think that one participant had said, it's really important to stay connected with the client. Jessica did, to assist them in meeting their needs, so that you can provide that warm handoff to the treatment team. And that is really an important point. So again, really focusing on reducing harm, not eradicating the behavior, providing practical options to minimize harm. We're not condoning risky behavior, but we're trying to reduce harm and death. Clients are the experts of themselves. They lead the process. And so we're just really trying to help them to see the pathway to reducing risk, to reducing harm. Recovery is nonlinear. So we talked about that a little bit too, is that there may be times where they're experiencing relapse or lack of motivation or access to resources or support systems, and all of this sort of affects. So it's just about small steps to then eventually cumulatively get to the place they want to get to. So it's about providing people support where they're at, and that letting them know that resilience develops over time. Right. So with each successful moment, we're building skills to be able to manage the future. He would say these clients stood against the wall and they talked through like times where things went well and times where things were challenging. And they would take a step forward and take a step back, because they really believed that whenever things didn't go the way they wanted to, that all was lost. And so by doing that physical action with them, they were able to see that even though they weren't all the way across the room, they were not where they started. So for some individuals you're going to work with, they really are struggling to see that even when they've had these relapses, they've still come a long way. Okay. So we're accepting that individuals are doing the best they know how to based on what resources they have and the conditions that they're surviving in. People who are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their recovery status. And that harm reduction reinforces safe interactions with people who are helping and promoting that real development of the person's intrinsic motivation, their own desire to move to a different place with their use. And that harm reduction is person-centered, that individuals can help themselves, that they are their greatest resource, right? It's not about it's not about us. It's about them valuing themselves. One of the most rewarding, there's lots of rewarding moments in doing this work, but you will find when you're working with people that sometimes you might have the privilege of seeing somebody more than once. And when you do, and they say, that they have this really amazing idea about what to do next. And it might be something you talked to them about a few times ago, but that's where, we talked about planting those seeds. That harm reduction is about planting those seeds so that when an individual is ready to harvest, they're proud of that work, that's their work that they brought, into focus. So
it's important to highlight those because I remember having a really great coworker, and it was her first time in the field, and she was just expressing like a lot of why can't they get it? Like, I really want this for them. And I shared with her, I had multiple providers come across my life, and it was multiple providers who poured into me and planted those seeds that you never know where it's going to click along the way.
That's right.
You never know. And so therefore you just have hope for the person and share that hope for them, and hope one day it clicks. And maybe one day you'll see them again coming down the road and they'll tell you, thank you.
That's right. That's right. Oh, excellent. All right. Well, so we're going to open up the time. We have, time left where you can ask questions or just share experiences. All of it is meaningful. So we're welcoming of any participation or last minute thoughts that you might be having. And certainly we can offer up some things too. So, Danielle, this might be one for you all as well. Any recommendations on a motivational interviewing training that is accessible across job classes or education?
Thank you, Jennifer. We will actually, at the MTAC Center, we will actually be delivering a motivational interviewing training. We are hoping to release a training schedule very soon. We are working with our partners at DHCS to get that finalized and out to you. And our hope is to be able to share trainings, with at least a month notice. So, share trainings for the next month as they roll out for this benefit. As we do know, there are these 5 core required trainings, as well as, I believe, 6 additional enhanced required trainings, and then supplemental, which are optional trainings. I believe there are about 21 topics that we are working to develop and get out to you. So motivational interviewing will be one that will be geared towards any qualified team member. So you don't have to be a clinician. You can be a peer. You can be a community health worker. You can be a first responder. These trainings are for any qualified mobile crisis team member through this mobile crisis Medi-Cal benefit.
I think it'd be normal if for some of you it felt intimidating or you're unsure. I don't know. I've been training people for a long time, and I'd rather have somebody, maintain that place of humility in knowing to explore more. I'm still working on what questions to ask. And things might come up for you later, or you might find yourself already, Googling things and looking things up, which I think is a wonderful byproduct of going to a training where you can actually say, okay, I want to learn more about this, or I want to understand more about that. And certainly CARS has some resources at the very bottom for people you can contact. We also have some slides also at the bottom that we used as resource for additional programs that are happening in California to help you to be aware of some, opportunities that there may be close to you, or even accessible, through telehealth that can help you in this work with harm reduction and help the people that you're taking care of. So
I am wondering, if anyone would like to share, just if any county is at the place where they are carrying, any mobile crisis responders are actually carrying and trained to administer the overdose reversal medication.
This is Ken from Butte County, and we're not required, but most of the team members do bring Narcan with us to the site. We know how helpful it can be, and usually the first responders aren't always there first. So that's our idea.
Hi, my name is Ruby Avila. I'm with Ventura County Behavioral Health. And we here at Ventura County do have a program that provides us kits. Our staff are trained to distribute those kits and to educate people on how to utilize them, and also educate on prevention. So we are able to provide those to not just the person that may be using the substance, but a family member who lives with someone who may be using a substance.
Thank you all for sharing. It's great to kind of see where everyone's at and what your teams are doing. It sounds like everyone is working towards it or already there, and even rescue breathing equipment. Thank you, Jacob, for sharing.
Jessica shares that Madera County each have a kit, and have been offered to be volunteered to become a trainer, but not required. So nice to know. Long Beach has a public health nurse on the team. And Exodus Recovery is trained, and they travel with the kit as well. So it's good. I know for Fresno County, their mobile crisis response has it as well. So it's good. It's getting out there.
Oh, I was just going to say, I can just show people that the harm reduction resources that are available. So there's a little bit here about the California Rural Indian Health Board and some of the projects that they have going on. So knowing your populations that you're serving and the resources that are available to them. And so we've got a little bit of information in the slide deck about that. California Bridge to Treatment. So this is another resource. It launched in 2018. So again, medication-assisted treatment. So if you have any interest in learning more about this program, you can certainly access it. And then the UCLA Integrated Substance Abuse Programs. These are free online courses that you can take, which is also a great resource. The Naloxone Distribution Project is another that if you want to learn more about with the California Department of Health. So you can also learn a little bit more about the training in the kits. There's another Brave app, which is, again, detecting overdoses. It's available. There are probably others out there as well. But wanted you to at least be aware of the resources that are around you. And, we're continuing to try and pull together even more. So that's something, if you're aware of, please feel free to let us know. We can add the resources to the list, or at least discuss them in office hours. And thank you for your participation today, because you all help to make these trainings better. And truly thank you for the work that you're going to be doing with this information. You're already making a difference just by giving your time today. So I just really, really appreciate that. Ariana, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything last.
Yes, I did. And I want to appreciate all y'all's feedback and everything you contributed to it. I was really grateful for the participation, and I look forward to just seeing the final results and hearing more from the surveys from you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Well, this will bring our presentation to a close. Everyone have a wonderful day, and thank you all for everything you did.